Veuillons nous asseoir.
Please take your seats. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. The session is called to order. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Clark in order to read out to us the first item of our agenda. Mr. Clark, you have the floor.
Honorable members, this afternoon we'll start with the business listed as items 5 and 6 on the agenda. Item 5 is presentation and debate on the report of the workshop on the role of the Pan-African Parliament in promoting free movement of people and the African passport. Item 6 is presentation and debate on the report on the fact-finding mission to Chirundu one-stop border post in Zambia. Thank you, Mr. President.
Présentation et débat.
Presentation and discussion of the report of the workshop on the role of the Pan-African Parliament in the promotion of the free movement of persons and the African passport, and presentation and discussion of the report of the workshop on the border post of Chirundu in Zambia. I would like to... Point of order. I think that what is part of the item is the presentation and debate on the report of the workshop on the transport. No, it has not been deferred. We have just reversed the order of these items. It has not been postponed. It has been just reversed. The order has been reversed. I give the floor to Mr. Eno Shivana, member of the Permanent Committee on Immigration and Customs, to make his... could you please present the recommendations of your workshop, of your two workshops?
Mr. President, it is an honor and privilege to stand before you, Mr. President and honorable members, to present two reports. One is on the role of Pan-African Parliament in promoting the free movement of people and the African passport. The second one is the fact-finding mission to Chirundu border by the Committee of Trade, Customs and Immigration Matters. Mr. President, I'm presenting these two reports on behalf of our chair, Honorable Dr. Mashakada from Zimbabwe, who has lost his mother. May her soul rest in peace. Mr. President, your Permanent Committee on Trade, Customs and Immigration, as one of the Pan-African Parliament committees, is mandated to pursue the concept of free movement of people and the fact that the treaty establishing the Pan-African Parliament bestows to the institution the duty of ensuring that this goal is facilitated and realized. Mr. President, the committee is alive to the fact that the concept of free movement of people cuts across the AU agenda for both integration and human rights, entitlement to free movement, right to residential, and right to establishment within the African continent, as enshrined in Chapter 6 of the Abuja Treaty of 1991. It is against this backdrop that the committee included in its work plan for the year 2017 the agenda on the free movement of people. The committee held on 9th March 2017 a workshop under the theme, the role of the Pan-African Parliament in promoting the free movement of people and the African Union passport, with the aim of deliberating and making recommendations to push Africa's goal of facilitating free movement of its people to its logical conclusion. Mr. President, free movement of people within Africa and the African passport is a topic of great relevance to the African Union and has been made part of the AU agenda for year 2017. It includes several pillars such as education, human resource development, transfer of technology, and development of skills. To drive the African economy, creation of employment opportunities across the African continent, good governance, youth empowerment, and gender parity, among others. Mr. President, the African Union is committed to delivering free movement of people and the African passport. The presenter to the workshop stated that the African Union Commission was working on a draft protocol on free movement of persons and the AU passport. The protocol covers three main aspects on mobility: 1, entry; 2, residence and establishment; 3. He highlighted some key milestones by the AU in realizing the AU passport as an instrument for intra-Africa mobility. The AU intends to subject the draft protocol on free movement of persons and the AU passport to many series of multi-stakeholder consultations and other planned throughout the year 2017 before submitting the refined version of the AU summit in January 2018 for adoption. One feature of the protocol is that, as per the decisions of the AU policy organ, it will come into force simply upon adoption without the normal requirement for 15 ratification by member states. Mr. President, the presenter also highlighted the migration of people as a key vehicle for economic development. It is a fundamental aspect of free movement of people that impacts positively on the gross domestic product of both the receiving and the source nations. On one hand, the receiving nations benefit directly through investments, labor, technology, and among others, while on the other hand, the source nations benefit through foreign exchange, the significance of the remittances. Free movement of persons and the African passport is that Africa must embrace as one of the catalysts for development and integration. The International Organization for Migration adopted the whole of government approach in handling immigration. This is a comprehensive and holistic approach that makes into account the multifaceted and complex nature of the phenomena of migration. Mr. President, I will now touch on the issue of the African Union passport. It is stated that the African Union passport is a fundamental enabler for intra-African mobility, as is posted in the AU Agenda 2063. Aspirations 2 and 7 of the AU Agenda 2063, the creation of an integrated and united African continent in terms of timelines. The AU projects that by 2020, visa requirements for intra-African mobility should have been abolished and replaced by an electronic AU passport that guarantees Zambia and Zimbabwe. The Pan-African mission took place from the 12th to 14th of March 2017 in Zambia, and the delegation was composed of 6 members of the Committee of Trade, Customs, and Immigration Matters. Mr. President, Chirundu is a border post between Zambia and Zimbabwe, located on either side of the Zambezi River. In December 2009, the Chirundu border post opened as a pilot one-stop border post within the Comesa region, which was also the first to be operational on the African continent. Chirundu is considered to be a good practice model for a number of reasons, including its entrenching within a regional context, comprehensive legal basis, and the decrease in border crossing times. Mr. President, Chirundu is a very busy border with about 1,200 persons, 300 trucks, 14 buses, 60 light vehicles crossing the border every day. About 200 border passes are issued per week. A border pass is a document which enables local residents of Zambia and Zimbabwe to cross to one country without a passport. The benefits of one-stop border post are, among others, to reduce time cost of doing business, to improve information sharing among border agencies, and to ensure drastic reduction of corruption practices and fraud. Mr. President, on the basis of this information gathered and the tour in Chirundu, we have seen that one border post can work in Africa. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I have a list of speakers here. The first speaker is Honorable Bernadette Lai from Sierra Leone. Honorable Dr. Bernadette Lai.
President. Mr. President, I think the issue of immigration and human resources, and also the free movement of goods, services, and people within and among African countries is a very good one. And in fact, if we really are talking of continental integration, then these are the first things that we really should put together, modalities that will ensure unhindered free movement of people, services, and goods. Currently, we have a lot of problems between our borders, within and among African countries, that is hindering the development of trade. So I think this is a very good initiative. The visit to the border between Zimbabwe and Zambia as a pilot is good. We've been told that over 80 countries in Africa have now adopted this one-stop shop. I'll be grateful maybe if we can get the names of these countries. I don't know whether my country is, because we have a crossing border between Sierra Leone and Guinea. We also have between Sierra Leone and Liberia. But whether it meets some of the conditionalities of this one-stop shop border is something that one wants to know. So maybe I want to know whether, in fact, it is one of them, or if it is not, maybe we in the West Africa and maybe the Mano River Union should now start talking, the parliamentarians here should now start talking to our ministers in charge, so that maybe we too can take a visit to study this one-stop shop, so that we can start discussing it and see how it can also benefit like the Mano River Union countries. I think it's good. The passport also is very good. But one thing, even now, as we are using the African Union passport, sometimes I wonder why, when I get to maybe South Africa or other countries, they're asking me for my Sierra Leone passport. They ask me for my Sierra Leone passport when I'm using the African Union passport. I don't know why. I hope that that will not be the thing that will happen when we have this one passport. Once we have this one passport, you don't want to know about my other passports from my country, because it should give me unequivocal access to another country, as long as I'm not a criminal, as long as, you know, they are satisfied that they have done the due diligence and that I can go free. This is what I want to say, but it's a very good thing. We should push it as soon as possible so that it becomes reality. I thank the presenters for this important presentation, and the committee that took part, and those that went on the visit on this border post. I thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
I thank you and give the floor to Honorable Martin Duterese from Burundi. Martin. I want to give the floor now to Honorable Glorieuse. I withdraw, Mr. President. I give the floor now to Honorable Sidia Ingiata from the Gambia.
Mr. President, traveling in Africa is a nightmare, generally. We came here late because of difficulties of traveling in Africa. First, visa transaction to come to South Africa took us a long time in Dhaka. And then the flight arrangement to come to South Africa also was so bad because we had to fly to Ethiopia, spend a night there before coming here. In other words, it's like we've traveled to South Africa twice by going through Ethiopia. And this issue of free movement of people, goods and persons, if I take the ECOWAS protocol on free movement of persons and goods, the protocol came into being in 1975. It had a grace period of 5 years, which means by 1980, they should have started fully implementing it. But it is still not implemented. Almost 40 years, it is not implemented. But it is ratified, and all agreed that after a 5-year period, the issue of free movements of people and goods in the ECOWAS zone would become history. But it is still the same. So what is wrong? Because we make protocols, we make conventions, we sign them, and we ratify them, and they don't come into being. We don't practice them at all. So what is the essence of doing all these things? I think the fundamental question and the effort that this parliament and institutions like this in our national... Can I complete?
Yes, 1 minute.
Yes, is to make sure that when these conventions and protocols are made and ratified, we should see to their implementation. Otherwise, there is no sense having them. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
I thank you very much and give the floor now to Honorable Jean Sanstris Vaskirin from Mauritius. I thank you, Mr. President. I would like to say first that the Pan-African Parliament has an important and essential role to play, and this in complementarity with the African Union in the promotion and also in the implementation of the free movement of persons and also the African passport. However, Mr. President, the African passport would not be of much use as long as borders will remain closed with a strict system of entry visa. It is not enough to have a passport, an African passport, in order to endorse a decision of the summit. Our states should take the necessary measures in order for this document to become a reference that is respected document by all of us. We have to note, Mr. President, that even with the official passport of the African Union, officials need to have visas for most of our member states. Mr. President, the purpose of these observations is to make sure that we translate on the ground our good intentions. Mr. President, in the report there was a mention that the African Union plans that by 2020 the obligation for a visa for the intra-African mobility will be removed and
the realization of the unification process in Africa. Therefore, the introduction of passport will play a pivotal, African passport will play a pivotal role in the free movement of the people in Africa. It was pathetic for the Gambian delegation, even though on diplomatic mission, to take 48 hours to get to this session. Hence, having the free movement and the African passport in place, situation like this will not find ourselves in. Thank you.
I give the floor now to Honorable Al-Haji Sanko Jami from the Gambia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the opportunity to add my voice to this important document. which is the draft report of the workshop on the role of the Pan-African Parliament in promoting the free movement of people and the African passport. Mr. President, we cannot call ourselves Africans if we don't go to each other and if we don't solve each other's problem. We can only do that when we go to each other's areas, because it is very important. Like, for example, going through this document, I have seen a lot of important points that if we all agreed and come to terms to put them in practice, Africa is going to be one of the best continents in the world, because there cannot be meaningful development if there is that not cooperation amongst ourselves. As Africans, we have to come together to solve our own problems and the like. We cannot solve our problems when we don't know each other's homes. We can only do that when we visited or when we visit each other's home, or if we hear any problem, any part of Africa, as a parliament, we come together to solve that amicably. I think if we do that, that will bring Africa, as we always say, one Africa, one voice. But if we don't go to each other, if our borders are restricted, then it means till now we are creating that difference amongst ourselves, and that will not bring us as we wanted. So on that note, I thank you very much and thank all those the committee that prepared this draft report. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I want to give the floor to Honorable Bangirana Anifa from Uganda.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I wish also to add my voice to compliment the report and the committee. Mr. President, multilateral discussions on free movement of people and goods over the years have tended to focus on repercussions and mainly for peace and security rather than the benefits, the economic benefits. And Mr. President, this brings me to the issue that African states either have completely ignored or they are reluctant to address the driving factors of migration, that is employment, poverty, political insecurity and intolerance, and inequality over the states. And Mr. President, globally, the issue of free movement, migration, and governance is a big challenge on the continent. Having said that, and aware under the movement rights in accordance with UDHR Article 13 and ICCPR Article 12, everyone lawfully has a right to liberty of free movement. We must note the word lawfully, meaning what? Mr. President, means that the states have got the right and authority to regulate free movement with some restrictions. Though in so doing, they must be mindful of people's respect, protect their fulfillment of human rights, but how many states do they do this one or do adhere to this one? Mr. President, this brings me to the committee's observation on page 4. The reluctance of a number of African countries to ratify AU instruments and support for the movement of people within Africa and the African passport because of their own selfish, with due respect, of safeguarding their national interest, and have crossed their borders to other people because of their own economic.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to Honorable Khaltoum Abdel Karim Suleiman from Sudan. I give the floor to Honorable Zalikatu Diallo from Guinea-Conakry. I thank you, Mr. President. I would like also to congratulate the presenter of these two reports, and particularly the relevance of the topic which is being discussed as concerns the free movement of persons. The implementation of this African passport is very important in order to achieve integration as recommended by Agenda 2063 and Integrated Africa. But in this respect, I think that we are facing a lot of challenges, Mr. President. We would like to recommend that there should be a coordination within member states, that is, between the various departments, security, the judiciary, in the implementation of these various decisions of the heads of state. And once the protocol enters into force, we need to intensify information in order to have a good coordination and in order to avoid any inconvenience. As we have noted, I would like also to hail the mission which went to the border post between Zambia and Zimbabwe. This one-stop shop border post, once implemented, will help remove all the inconvenience of an administrative nature at the borders. I give the floor now to Honorable Hatem Basha from Egypt. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah. I thank you, Mr. President, for giving me this opportunity. I think that the Pan-African Parliament needs to have a very important role in the promotion of the free movement of persons outside their borders. Considering that the free movement of persons is one of the human rights and it was adopted by all religions, and there is no right to confiscate this right from people, and people have the right even to appeal in this respect, and I hope that the constitutions will be adopted in order for constitutions to insist on this right. I think that there are a lot of security conditions that probably prevent from implementing the African passport, especially if we take into consideration terrorism. But we can proceed gradually and give as an example, that is, give this African passport first to African organizations and then businessmen at the African level. Thank you. I give the floor now to Honorable Vanita Santos from South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I must just echo empathy and sympathy with the delegation from Gambia. Hearing about how long it took you to get here, I'm sure you must be exhausted from that trip. But, Mr. President, people are raising in this room the whole issue of the fact that this passport that we hold, the AU passport, doesn't seem to hold water in many countries, and we heard in South Africa as well. May I ask that you commission the research department to do an analysis of which countries accept the AU passport and pass that information on to members so that they would know that, look, let me travel with my Parliament passport and my AU passport, and in the event of a problem, that at least I have a backup. One of the honorable members, I think from Sudan, if I recall, during the Pan-African Activity Report, said how he had a problem. Others were let through, but he was not let through. And just quickly to let you know that yesterday, Cabinet of South Africa approved a white paper on immigration, but with specific reference to lifting visa in Africa.
Facilitated effectively. So I hope that as we go along and as facts avail themselves to us, we should be able to be in a stronger position to engage the AU more effectively for the efficient and the effective development process of the continent. Thank you, sir.
Merci. La parole.
I thank you. I call on Honorable Ndebo Akandanyas from DRC. Mr. President, I thank you very much for this opportunity, but I haven't asked for the floor. Well, weirdly, when you do not ask for the floor, it's given to you. Thank you. I now give the floor to Honorable Mgo Kaiwa Kenewadu from Botswana. The floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Mr. President. Once again, just for reference, my name is Boholo Kinewendo from Botswana.
Please. Boholo or Bogolo?
Boholo.
Boholo.
Yes.
Yeah.
And last name is Kinewendo.
Yes, Kinewendo is okay.
Yes.
Kinewendo is okay.
Right. Great. Thank you very much. I also would like to throw my 2 cents to this committee's work. First, to congratulate them for taking on this very important task, as I believe wholeheartedly that the true integration of Africa and independence lies in economic independence and being able to rid our people from those shackles of poverty. And I really believe that by using trade in order to facilitate not just regional integration, but to facilitate the upliftment of people is the right way to go. We are currently working at just about maybe 12% of intra-African trade, and I think that is very dismal compared to, say, Europe, that is currently at 86%. And honestly, this is a problem because it just follows on our traditional trade paths, those that are very colonial. Just to give you an example, when we're talking about trading, say, between Botswana and Ghana, it is twice as expensive to transport in comparison to when you're trading between Ghana and the UK or Botswana and the UK. And this is because we haven't really established our very own trade channels and paths and made non-tariff barriers to be fewer and those that add lesser costs to doing business in the region. So I think it's very important that we continue to look at these OSS. 1 minute, Mr. President, since we discussed my name for a bit, but to look at these OSSs and ensure that they work and that really at regional spaces we start the integration there so that when we start talking CFTA, we know that different regions are strong. And also when we discuss the CFTA, we need to ensure that we start those negotiations, including free movement of persons, not just persons, but also business persons that will ensure we grow regional economic integration. Thank you, Mr. President.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I now call on Honorable Gabriel Smith from Liberia.
Thank you, Mr. President. The issue about inter-African trade with respect to the free movement of citizens across the borders of Africa can never be overemphasized. This is very cardinal to our economic survival as a continent. But there are some inhibiting factors that must be considered. Drug movement on the continent of Africa is now at an alarming proportion. So it becomes somewhat difficult to promote some of the ideas that we come and talk about insofar as they look good. But there are some challenges that are associated with them. I would not want to see my border open to every African and see somebody just bringing drug within my country and polluting the youth of the country. So these are reasons for which we have some very stiff immigration policies. But we all agree that indeed, as Africans, if we must unite as a people, we have to create a necessary legal framework that will guide the movement of citizens from one border to another. And so to ensure that we can have such a free movement, I also believe that that legal framework must define what category of persons, under what condition, do you leave your country to enter my country? There must be some check and balances. But on the overall, I know very well, like most of us here think, that one of the reasons that got Africa behind in trade is because of the restriction that we have in our movements. And so,
1 minute more.
Presiding, I will think that with respect to the report being submitted, it is good. for us to design the requisite legal framework that will allow the movement of our people from country to country so as to enhance trade. But that legal framework must clearly define what level of restriction needs to be placed so as to avoid the movement of people who will do or carry out trade that will otherwise negatively impact our population. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I now call on Honorable Abdurazak Saad from Nigeria.
Hello. Mr. President, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I want to say that there is no better time to discuss this very important issue other than now, particularly the role of Pan-African Parliament in the promoting of free movement of people within Africa. Mr. President, it is easier to move from Africa to Europe than to move within Africa itself. And that is very difficult. It took me almost have to spend a night to go to Sierra Leone, which is a 2 hours journey from Nigeria. I have to sleep in Ghana. So you can imagine that kind of situation. And I will say, Mr. President, I also had a bitter experience when I went for an official mission in Algeria using the African passport. When I got to Egypt, my passport was actually not recognized. The AU passport was not recognized. I had to bring my own national passport. It even took, again, another 2 hours. I think there is need for us, or for this parliament, just as suggested, that this AU passport should be made seriously known. I want you committee or whatever thing will be done so that people should be made to know that this is an African Union passport. But I don't need to bring my own personal passport. And even if I bring, it's still a subject of dispute. And it appears no more publicity is done in that regard, and that will help. I will say, Mr. President, the movement of people within Nigeria, within Africa will help so much that trade is so much there. Before the scramble of Africa by our colonial masters, there was free movement within the African continent. Now that some lines and borders have been established, this passport is trying to take us back to what we used to be so that we can have free movement within the African continent. And that I wish that we move a step further to ensure that people move freely within the continent. I thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, the debate is so important that we can't stop now. Let me just go back to some points before giving the floor back to the presenter. First, I would like to say that all those who had some troubles and hassles in Egypt with regard to the passport should notify this to me for us to raise it in common. And then the passport that we have today, I don't know what value it has actually, because sometimes you're admitted and accepted in, and I've even used it, and some agents of the air companies require an ID or a passport from Cameroon, but not the Pan-African Parliament passport. So I think that as it was, as we refer to Agenda 2063, we should have started to build roads. All the trans-African roads are stopped. Projects are stopped now. I don't know how much it would take to go to Nigeria, for instance. Therefore, we do have a genuine transport problem. We don't have railways, and the road transport is almost impossible because of numerous hassles that you encounter on the roads. Furthermore, I'd like to say that the main element that impedes the development of our trade is the money, the currency. I'd like to ask the presenter, what is the currency that's used at the border, the one-stop shop border of Zambia? Because the problem that we have is that trade. There is no currency that enables us to make purchases in one country or another. We have two CFRs from Western Africa and Central Africa. These cannot be interchanged. I think that a single currency for Africa would expedite the trade among our countries, and because each time our dollar is linked to the euro and the dollar pegged to the euro and the dollar. And when I come here, I have to have rand as well, and we lose a lot of money in the meantime. When we talk about terrorism, I think that our colleague from Mauritius has raised the problem and answered to it. We cannot say today that terrorism needs a visa. People get radicalized within the countries and become terrorists. Therefore, pooling our action would require to put an end to this problem of terrorism that is spreading over from one country to another. The free movement also does not mean that there is no control, there is no vetting. We need to secure the vetting of our borders. Now, to conclude, I wanted to refer to the negative impact that the currency has on our trade. Our colleague from Botswana referred to this. Let me give you a simple example. Cameroon is a timber-producing country, and Tunisia is a consuming country. But to sell timber to Tunisia, this should go through France and then go back to Tunisia. And since I'm the first seller, I do not have any value added because of the price. But if you sell an African product in Africa, within Africa, the second seller would have obtained or gained added value. Therefore, this is one of our weaknesses also, and we really need to settle this transport problem, these custom barriers. An economy that works only inside or within the countries, we need to exchange. We need to have trade among us for us to develop our economy. Now, let me give the floor back to the presenter to bring some clarifications or some answers to the questions and concerns raised by the colleagues. The floor is yours, Mr. Nock.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and honorable colleagues, for your brilliant ideas and contributions. Mr. President, indeed, issues of trade, free movement of people, African passport is at the heart and core of this organization. Mr. President, at Chirundu border, we found some challenges. One of them, indeed, is the issue of currency. It has become a multi-currency. Mainly it's done on black market because on both sides there are no banks. So you have to trade on black market, which is very, very risky. There's Zambian kwacha, there's euro. Any currency you might need, you find it on black market, which is a problem. That's why we want to appeal to two governments to make sure that they have to make sure that they have infrastructure on both sides to support this one border post. On the issue of how many countries are trying to have this one border post, we are yet to get some names from ECOWAS and the East Africa also community, so that they can give us, so that at least our committee can visit those areas, so that at least we can know what's happening. The other issue which we have seen, it's also a problem, Mr. President, honorable colleagues, is the issue of ratification, domestication, and implementation of especially AU protocols. What we have found out is that most of us, when we go home, we just pack our bags until the next session. We don't engage our governments to make sure that our parliaments should ratify these AU protocols, or we should lobby our governments to make sure that these protocols are ratified and they should be domesticated and implemented. That's why maybe also we have a problem with our passport, because even our immigrations, they have not been sensitized on this AU passport. So maybe it can be our responsibility as members of Parliament of PAP to take up the issue with our respective ministers of Home Affairs and International Relations. There's also an interesting issue on the passport that maybe we should start on a pilot. It should be a pilot project, maybe to start with very few. Maybe we start with businessmen, our civil servants, and eminent people. Then later on we can go down to our citizens to see how it's going to work. The other issue, which is very critical, is issues of economies of scale, where some countries are safeguarding their interest, and they will not allow people migrating into their countries freely. And another issue which I think as we go on in the implementation of free movement of people and the African passport is the issue of drugs. Indeed, I come from Malawi. Malawi has been noted as one of the conduits of drugs which are coming from east-west, going down through Malawi all the way to South Africa. So, Mr. President, these are some of the observations, and we all know that the main problem that is hindering trade in Africa also is lack of infrastructure, land, air, and sea. Indeed, it's not easy to trade within Africa because of lack of infrastructure. This, I think, also our governments should put it as one of the first priority to make sure that before, indeed, we embark on full throttle on trade, we have to look at the infrastructure in our countries. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Merci beaucoup, cher.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. We will think the matter over and we'll see how the passport is issued. When you know that in most of our countries, having a passport or releasing a passport is a way of making money for the states. This is one of the problems that
in PAP premises, Midrand, Johannesburg, a workshop called Workshop on Transport Sector in Africa, Challenges and Perspectives. This workshop took place in 3 sessions, during which presentations addressed the following issues. A presentation on the state of implementation of the NEPAD program in the transport sector in Africa. This presentation was made by Mr. Adama Dean, Principal Advisor on Infrastructure in the transport sector in Nepal. The second theme was on the role of universities in the promotion of transport sector. Professor Weinstein, head of the Department of Engineering at the University of Pretoria, presented this theme. The third presentation was on the role of parliaments in improving the transport sector in Africa, was presented by Dr. Mateta Mokonyama from the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research of South Africa. Following these presentations and the discussions which followed, there was a set of recommendations submitted. I will not give you the introductory clauses and move straight to the recommendations. Recommendation 1, NEPAD and the African Union Commission supports the academia for the strengthening of of training and capacity building of engineers through research training by resorting to universities chosen in different regions and by establishing a partnership with the user sector for employing engineers and technicians for practical internships to help them rise up to the challenges faced by infrastructure in Africa. 2, African Union facilitates the program of intra-African trade in the field of education and harmonization of engineering and technology training in the continent in order to train technicians and engineers who would manage the infrastructure projects in the respective member states of the regional member states. Number 3, the African Union Commission initiates the reformulation of the training program to enable technicians and engineers to lay emphasis on the problems of Africa in the field of infrastructure by giving them social and practical skills in order to step up their employability in their countries and across the continent. Number 4, the African Union shall work in collaboration with development partners and select universities to put in place a scholarship program in engineering to fund universities and engineers to pursue their studies and undertake research aimed at finding solutions to the problems of Africa in the field of infrastructure. Number 5, governments of the member states of the African Union shall submit to their respective parliaments all the treaties, agreements, and protocols related to the improvement of the transport sector for ratification in order to enable the African Union agencies, particularly NEPAD, to fast-track the implementation of the main projects and release the socio-economic potential of Africa. Number 6, the regional economic communities, RECs, and national governments of the member countries shall strengthen their collaboration with NEPAD in order to undertake feasibility studies, mobilize financial resources, and implement infrastructure projects. So this is the gist of the recommendations which came out of this workshop. And to conclude, I would like to share this saying with you, to say that transport is so important for the development of states and the development of nations, and it is exactly like what blood vessels represent for the human body. Thank you. Thank you, dear colleague. Thank you very much. Honorable Maxime.
Honorable Dr. Bernadette Lahaye from Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it's a good thing that this presentation is coming after the one we have just had. We can now see the nexus between having the free movement of people, goods, and services, and also providing, in fact, the real infrastructure that will take these people, because there is no use giving free visas and everything if you don't also improve on the infrastructure. Very good. So on the presentation itself, what we need to really do is there are still a lot of charters, a lot of decisions in the transport sector that most of us in Africa, we have either signed nor ratified, some have ratified, and some have not signed. And they all have their implications in opening up the transport sector. For example, you have the Yamoussoukro decision. The Yamoussoukro decision is meant to open the skies within Africa. But that decision has not come into effect because a lot of countries have not signed or ratified. When you go to the marine sector, you also know that there is the African Charter on Marine Transportation. That charter needs to be signed, ratified by our member states also. So what I would recommend this committee to do, let us work with the African Union Committee on Transport and get all those charters, decisions, and protocols in the transport sector, be it in the air, rail, and everything. Let's have it, share it with members, those who have signed, those who have not ratified, and those who are implementing, so that members will know exactly where we are, because these are very important. The legal framework for making this infrastructure available is also very important. So maybe that is a work that I want the committee to do. Share the information with the rest of the members in terms of all the transport sectors, where are the legal instruments, what has happened to them, who is where within this legal instrument. I think it will help this parliament a lot, so that when we go back to our respective countries, we will meet with our ministers of transport to say, hey, here are the decisions, here are the protocols. We have signed this, we have not signed this. We have signed this, we have not ratified this. Because at the end of the day, if these protocols do not come into effect, then we will not take advantage of the benefits that.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Sidia Chadia from Gambia. Jata. Thank you very much. Let me give the floor to Honorable Sekou Fantamadi Traoré from Mali. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Zalikatou Diallo from Guinea.
Merci. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to commend Honorable Aliou Condé for the quality of his presentation, especially on such a relevant issue as the challenges and prospects in the transport sector. We all agree that in order to integrate Africa, we must make sure that transport issues are addressed. There has been a lot of delay ever since the multinational airline Air Africa was closed down, because in the past, transportation was much easier. If I give you just one example, if I leave Guinea to go to Liberia, which is our neighbor, I have to go to Lomé, Accra, sometimes spend the night in Côte d'Ivoire before I get to Liberia the next day. So this, of course, is a recurrent issue. And even to come here, we need a very windy route before I get to destination. So I think we need to think of establishing a multinational airline. Secondly, I have a question on the flagship project which was presented about 2 years ago by the African Union on the high-speed train, which was to link all the African capitals by 2063. What is the status of the implementation of this project? I think that the Transport Committee of the Pan-African Parliament should question the African Union Commission on this project, which will help us solve a lot of problems, because, as the President has just said, the African railways are not working anymore. Thank you.
To Honorable Ernesto Joaquim Mulato from Angola.
Thank you, President. I think in most cases my colleagues have already preempted my intervention, but there is something that I would like to address, because there's one section that says that the NEPAD projects face many difficulties. I think that these difficulties are essentially financial. And in this proposal, there is nothing that makes us as members to push
research and development, sharing best practices, collaboration, etc., etc. Can be done. How we what we teach in the university in Africa here, hardly you see a university that teaches transportation and logistics. You hardly see that. You hardly see a university in Africa here that teaches aeronautics and aviation. So where actually are we going if the fundamental issues of actually how to support the transport sector actually is not done in our schools and universities? And for the most part, we have to depend on the foreign experts to help us. I think it's about time for Africa, if we want to solve African issues on our own, is to invest heavily on research and development, especially in the transportation sector. And again, that would drill down to science and technology. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Jacqueline from Rwanda.
Thank you, Mr. President, for affording me this opportunity to contribute to this debate before the Parliament. Mr. President, first of all, I wish to thank my colleague, the chairperson of the Committee on Transport, for the report well elaborated with clarity and professionalism. As a former minister on transport, he masters the sector. Mr. President, as you all know, the transport sector is the main driver for African integration, trade, free movement of people, and sustainable economic development. Mr. President, as has been said by the previous presenter on trade, on one-stop border post as one of the strategies to remove, to facilitate trade in Africa, we still have many challenges in this sector of transport. Many challenges, I can mention some of the challenges. One is the lack of the political will from our partner states, lack of genuine political will, absence of clear and well-coordinated transport infrastructure development and a legal framework are among of those challenges in terms of harmonization within our regional economic communities. Second challenge is we need a regional cooperation, strong regional cooperation between our regional economic communities. Mr. President, I wish to take this opportunity for the historical decision by our African heads of states to put 0.2% of our importation in order to self-finance our African program and project. Mr. President, I think from the guidance from the fourth Vice President, Honorable Bernadette Lahai, the committee will need, in collaboration with the Committee on Trade, to be in touch with the Commissioner.
1 more minute, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. President. To again organize this kind of workshop, because this workshop was not really organized because some of the commissioners of the African Union were not available. So we will need really to reorganize this workshop because it is a very sensitive subject in terms of economic development of our continent. For example, we are supposed to identify the various regimes and related instruments on transport sector in Africa and the status of their ratification. We had planned to identify policy legislation gaps and the challenges faced in improving transport sector in Africa. So to have a really global picture of this sector, we will need to reorganize this kind of workshop in order to bring on board all the relevant stakeholders on board. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Atem Bashar from Egypt.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
In the name of God, the most gracious and merciful, Mr. President, this is one of the very important issues on our table, because this issue actually allows us to explore all the potential available in the continent, because we know that Africa is a continent where there is a lot of capacity. But unfortunately, we are lagging behind because we don't have the right infrastructure. Road infrastructure is extremely important for the transport sector in the continent. Now, if we want to ensure the integration of Africa, we cannot neglect the importance of free movement of people and services in all sectors. So we have to rise up to the challenge in a scientific manner, and there needs to be a very strong political will in order to build the capacity of the transport sector. This is the reason why we must do our best to ratify the existing instruments and conventions of the African Union related to the transport sector. So all of us need to make proposals and recommendations and even organize seminars to address all these issues. Maybe we could also use different systems such as BOT or other types of mechanisms to facilitate the funding of such infrastructure. I thank you. I thank
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. President, I quite adopt most of the presentations here, particularly the one raised by Bernadette Lahai, that there is need for us to implement some of these conventions and protocols, even though there was fear that was raised by my colleague from the Gambia that, for example, in ECOWAS, 40 years ago, some of these treaties were ratified, but it was not implemented. I hope that we can move one step forward to see that it is implemented. Mr. Speaker, I come from Nigeria, you are from Cameroon. From my constituency to your place is just we have a problem of just a road infrastructure. And if the governments of Nigeria and Cameroon particularly will cooperate, you discover that it will take just 30 minutes to meet you in your house so that I can have a dinner with you. But Mr. President, it's not easy because we have issues in Africa, and it's important governments of our country should be able to cooperate with one another so that we can open up some of these roads, so that we can have this free trade. It will generate funds for us, and it will also increase movement of people. That will be very important if the road infrastructure is done, and that can only be done also if these treaties are done and implemented. Mr. Speaker, I hope, Mr. President, that this will be done. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Dr. Runandi Matembe from South Africa.
Mr. President, honorable members of this August House, thank you very much for this opportunity. Mr. President, throughout the debates this afternoon and this morning, we tend to focus more on lamenting. May I refer to what we are doing in our country? We do have a program called the NDP, National Development Plan. President, clear baseline data, specific targets with clear timelines, resources committed to those targets, then a program that does the monitoring, Mr. President, as to how far we are. This is a proposal on behalf of my country I would wish to share with the Pan-Africanist Parliament and maybe take a leaf out of the program that we are implementing in our country. Amongst the priorities that we have is infrastructure. You go from each of these provinces, you'll see a network of roads under construction, Mr. President. So I am humbly appealing that maybe if we could exchange some notes and see what the Republic of South Africa is doing, you know, clear, I'm summarizing now, clear baseline data, specific targets with clear timelines, resources committed to those targets, and then a program that monitors the progress that is being made. That's my submission.
Thank you very much, Honorable Doctor. And now I want to give the floor to
such a train. And today, the shortage of energy is so serious in our continent that if you plan to have a high-speed train from Johannesburg to Yaoundé, going to Abidjan, I don't know exactly what the itinerary is. I think that we have to wait for 2063, but it's already in the pipeline, and I'm sure that it will be implemented. Secondly, the major problem we face here, and I often say that it has not to do with human resources as such. We have a very high-level thought process, but at the end of our meeting, whatever we say here remains here. Nobody takes this back to his or her country to use it. An honorable doctor said, we're all the time lamenting, this has not been done, that has not been done. So what do we do to convey this message? What do we do to take this message back home? In the next session of the Parliament in the month of June, I will ask the Minister for Foreign Affairs to make sure what can be done to acknowledge the African Union passport. You get to the border post, people say, well, I've never seen such a passport. What do you do then? That is the problem. Whatever the Minister of Transport has just said, it's doable. My brother and neighbor of Nigeria told you this. Let's ask the right questions. Let's push for it. As long as we don't have roads, we don't have the air links to go from Paris to Brussels. How many kilometers? People, go from one place to the other in an hour or an hour and a half. I cannot leave Yaoundé to go to Malabo, which is much closer. So we must be bold. And everybody just complains, everybody laments, right from the implementation of the Organization of the African Unity, OAU, in 1963 up to the AU in 1999. The African states have adopted at least 50 legal instruments. How many of them are being enforced? Maybe just 5 of them. Now, this means that we still have a lot of work on our plate, and this is our responsibility. And even if, while we wait for the legislative power to take the decisions, let us try and ratify the legal instruments in our different states. Not only the ratification, but the enforcement. The lady told us here that we need to domesticate the different treaties and conventions that we sign. Otherwise, it will be very difficult. The 2 presentations are complementary. We spoke about passports, the free movement of people and goods, and now we are talking about transport. What can facilitate the free movement of persons and goods? It is transport. And this is the reason why I'd like to give the floor to the chairperson of the Transport Committee. If he has any comments or answers to offer, he can take the floor. Thank you, Mr. President. I think what matters has been said. In fact, all the remarks made are similar to the recommendations made. But I'd like to come back to one issue, and that is the issue of passports, to explain how it functions. In reality, when a passport is adopted by a country, then we'll see what happens at the African Union. It means that this country has to send a copy of this passport. In fact, the Minister of Home Affairs submits it to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and sends a copy. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs has to send this copy to all its partners at the international level to inform them about the new passport which is in force in the country under consideration. So this document is sent to the ministries of foreign affairs of other countries, who in turn send this to the relevant departments, and the Ministry of the relevant ministry sends an answer back to the country to say that as of such a date, the passport enters into force. If you don't follow this procedure, you will have a situation where the technical departments will not be aware of the existence of such a passport and reject it. So this work has to be done. At the AUC, the work should be done by the committee in charge of international relations. I don't know if this is being done. So this should be done in the AU and in our countries. Now, to come back to our own topic, I think everybody agrees with the importance of the transport sector. This is absolutely unavoidable. We can't engage in any human activity without working on the transport. So for African integration, it was said by all the speakers earlier, transport needs to be developed. It goes without saying. And for transport to be developed, research and development should also pick up speed. It should be given more importance so that our new pupils, our new students can come up with new development projects. And then we spoke about exchange of experiences. It's very important to come and see what the more advanced countries are doing. And we must admit that there are 2 types of problems. We have problems within our borders because our domestic roads are not completed. The national and local airports are not well developed. The river and maritime transport is also not developed within the countries. So beyond that, we have the international transport between African countries. Here again, we need to make more efforts. It's true that the Pan-African Parliament, what we can do initially is to go back to our countries and continue lobbying to make sure that the different agreements are ratified. My own country, for example, last year, we ratified the Charter on Maritime Transport. But all these years, for over 10 years, the Charter had not been ratified. And there are many of these agreements in rail transport also. Today, we want to develop our railways, but we are stumbling against the local legislation because there are certain obstacles. And once again, I'd like to tell you that since yesterday, the Africa Finance Corporation is meeting in Abuja with the 12 projects presented by NEPAD with a funding of about $13 billion, and all this in the field of transport. And the flagship program was that of the Togo corridor, which goes up to Niger with a rail link of more than 1,500 kilometers, with the development of the ports as well as other infrastructure. So NEPAD is working on this. So within our committee, what we should do is to get in touch with NEPAD to know exactly what's being done there for Africa and see the consistency of the whole mechanism so that we can be the spokespersons of these projects to market them better to the different countries. So today, the exchange of experience recommended by South Africa is appropriate and is most welcome. All the honorable members of the parliament who come to South Africa are struck by the development of the road transport, the airport, and of course, maritime transport for those who have gone to Cape Town or Durban. You all know that South Africa has done a lot for the development of its transport. We have a lot to learn from them, and we are ready to learn from them. And within our committee, we will organize workshops to try and look closely at these sectors to see how they're organized, what exists, so that we can disseminate it and we can share the information. So this, briefly, is what I had to say. The deputy chairperson is here, the rapporteur is here. Since we all work together, with your indulgence, I would like to request you to give them the floor if they have anything to add. Madam Deputy Chairperson, do you have anything new to add? Thank you, Mr. Rapporteur.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, we would like to thank you and count on you in order to move on and benefit from all the experiences in order for us to reflect that in our countries, and let's ratify the text in order to move on. So I'm putting to vote the various recommendations, no observations, no